Greetings, good morning, welcome. Donald J. Trump, an Eastern view. You might wonder what is there to talk about Donald J. Trump from an Eastern perspective. Well, after all, the East and the West together constitute the world, though people living in the Western Hemisphere have for a very long time entertained the illusion that only the West matters. But interestingly, at the time of the birth of Jesus Christ, wisdom in the form of wise men came to visit him from the east, not from the west. So it's only natural that now and then, at least, there is a spark of wisdom emanating from the east. And I hope that those of my brothers and sisters in the Western Hemisphere who might chance upon this small video will remember what happened some 2000 years ago. So, now, what is this Eastern view on the brightest star, maybe the darkest star in the Western Hemisphere, President Donald J. Trump, who occupies the most powerful office on planet Earth, which is also his problem? Now, let's try and understand. Surely you will agree with me that when you and I try to think of or imagine Donald J. Trump, the first word that comes into our mind, the word that looms large in our mental horizon, is self will. Self will. He is the most self willed individual you can think of. And I can say this with a clear conscience that he is the most self willed individual in public life that I have ever become aware of. It may be because of the limitations of my knowledge or awareness, but in my mind, there is no uncertainty at all that none exceeds, none surpasses Donald J. Trump in the malignant and assertive nature of his self will. He believes that because he has come to occupy the most powerful office in the world, he has the right or he has acquired the license to inflict his will on everyone, including his own people, as is now evident from the standoff between the federal forces and the local authorities in Minnesota, a state that I have visited on a couple of occasions. So let's try and understand. What is the problem with Donald Trump's self will? Let's start with the basics in order to be clear. Every one of us has a will of our own. It will be highly defective if a person does not have a will of his own. There are people like that. In fact, more and more people are becoming like that. And that's the main reason why Trump has enormous popularity in the United States. Popularity may be waning a little bit as of now, but still he has a committed, indissoluble bank of supporters. And the main reason is that a majority of people in any given society, in any country, are in a will-less state. They are like inanimate objects to be acted upon by external forces and shaped according to their will. People are finding it increasingly difficult to assume responsibility for themselves, and they are happy to become malleable and ductile in the hands of others so that they can uh, shape them according to their will. So that if you go to the Old Testament, the prophets imagine the human condition or human beings as clay in the hands of the potter, but the potter is God. But in the modern secular society, the contemporary world, human beings are like clay in the hands of potters, many potters, they're not gods, they are secular forces, and people allow themselves to be shaped by these secular potters. So everyone has a will, everyone must have a will of his own. But then there's a difference. The difference being malignantly self willed and being healthily self willed. If you have a will, if I have a will, it is meant to be exercised. There is no point in saying that I have a will but I don't exercise it. I will not exercise it. Then you won't be fully human. Then you will only be an object like a dead fish that is carried here and there by the stream, or a float sand, or dead wood, driftwood, or dead wood, or whatever way you like to call it. So, first of all, everyone has a will, or rather, everyone is a will. Secondly, if you are a will, you must exercise it. But the question is, how are you to exercise it in a state of fidelity to your identity as a human being? Now, you can exercise your will like an animal. For example, if a lion sees a deer, it decides to act, it decides to exercise its will. That will is exercised in a unilateral manner, having regard only to the interest of the lion and utterly insensitive, uncaring towards the object of attack. That's how an animal exercises its will. Surely that mode of exercising your will is not appropriate to you as a human being. If you think you're only an animal, then it is appropriate. So, what is the appropriate way of exercising one's will as far as a human being is concerned? That is something you have to understand clearly if you are to follow what I have to say about President Donald J. Trump. The healthy way of exercising the will as far as a human being is concerned, or exercise it in fidelity to our calling as human beings or identity as human beings, is as follows. I have a will. I need to exercise that will. So, in order to exercise that will, I need something external to myself. That's the case even with an animal. For a lion to exercise its will, there must be an object, maybe a deer, it may be a wild goat or whatever. There must be an object. So, in exercising one's will, one connects oneself to something outside of oneself. As far as an animal is concerned, the matter stops there. But because of the uniqueness of our creation as human beings, and according to the Bible, created in the image and likeness of God, something further follows. And that is precisely what we need to be clear about if we have to understand the terrible limitation of Donald J. Trump. Pathetic. Okay, so let's be clear about that. In the case of a human being, your will goes out, engages the other, and realizes that there is some gain to be secured by relating to it. But then the question will arise, how is that gain to be realized? Because in the way of you're trying to realize or appropriate that gain to yourself, you could turn that gain into a terrible loss. And that's the paradox of being human. For example, if you attack, if a lion attacks a deer, kills it and eats it, there is no moral repugnance. But if a man sees a woman and believes that he is physically more powerful than her, therefore he can overpower her and then subject her to physical indignity in the form of rape, then he has exercised his will. But in exercising that will and attaining his goal, he has desecrated himself. That doesn't apply to a lion or an animal, any other animal. It applies only to human beings because we are moral creatures. This is something that President Trump seems not to understand. Perhaps it's too much of to expect of him. So, two things have to be understood very clearly, because these two things are very distinctive of humanity, very unique to humanity, and absolute clarity must be attained in relation to them. These two things are, now let's follow the sequence. I have a will, I must exercise that will. There's an object outside of me, and I'm going to exercise that will. But at that point in time, the process of reflection or process of examination or consideration sets in. I begin to think. I must think. An animal acts out of sheer instinct. Human beings have to go beyond instinct and think. They have to conceptualize. Now, in that process of thinking, what you're doing is you're withdrawing from that object into yourself. You are now referring the whole thing to yourself, your quality as a human being, your value system, your vision, your awareness of humanity, the big picture, your training as a particular person, a Hindu or Muslim or a Christian, or you're the representative of a particular party. The party has a future beyond you. You're also representing a great nation, which was envisaged by its founding fathers as a city set on a hill to give light to all nations of the world. All those considerations are inside of you. So, in the manner in which you try to relate to the other, you return into yourself and process it there. And in that process of processing this particular situation, you also factor what is universal. Not only your personal considerations, but also you belong to humanity, and therefore there are universal considerations. For example, rule of law. Putin, in attacking Ukraine, was violating the rules-based international order because he does not have the capacity to apply his will in the manner that is appropriate to a human being. So let's be clear about it. At the point of deciding to act, action is what actualizes the will. Will is a formation or a formatting of the mind, depending on how the person who has the will connects to the external object. And then that connection between the individual and that external object is now processed by the inner condition of the individual, his personal qualities, but not only his personal qualities, but also his awareness of the universal system, universal values, ideals, a sense of accountability to the world. And in the case of those who are spiritual, our accountability to God. So multiple considerations participate in the process of processing that situation, and a final decision as to how exactly to deal with that particular object, how to treat that object, whether that object should be honored, whether that object should be desecrated, whether that object should be stolen, whether that object should be corrupted. All will depend on the ultimate product of this process that happens in a lightning manner. Individual is not always conscious of this process as I try to explain it in an elaborate, detailed manner, because there's no other way it can be explained. But unfortunately, in the case of our friend Donald J. Trump, that the last two things that I mentioned do not seem to happen. Now, for example, take the case of Greenland. This is something that Americans don't understand. This is something that Europeans, who are the victims of this, don't understand. At least there is no evidence that people understand it. That's the reason why we from India need to project a perspective so that people globally can understand it in perspective. This is a kind of contribution India should be making to the global scenario. Rather than claiming that we are world gurus, let's contribute some relevant thinking. So now think of Greenland. Donald J. Trump is not the first person to find out that Greenland is extremely crucial for, geopolitically crucial for world American interests and world security. This is not his personal discovery. Many before him thought so, but why did they not act? If you ask Trump, he would say, well, because they were idiots or they're nincompoops. They were they were all Bidens. Hmm? Stupid, crooked Biden. Trump does not realize that the whole world is not obliged to read Biden as he reads him. Other people may understand Biden differently. I don't hold a brief for Biden, but I don't certainly agree with Donald Trump's assessment of Biden. And if you recall, 4 years ago, when Biden became president, at that time I said that, in my opinion, Biden is not fit to be the president of the United States. Leave alone that observation. It's a matter of debate. Nor is it particularly relevant at this time. I'm simply recalling something I said at that time. Just to tell you that I'm not advocating Biden's case. But I don't agree with what Donald Trump is saying, and Donald Trump seems to be fixated, which itself is a psychological problem. Okay, now Greenland. As the President of the United States of America, everyone would agree that Donald Trump has the duty to maximize American interests. So he, as the President, is now going to exercise his will vis-a-vis Greenland. And he has connected to Greenland. This much any animal will do in terms of what I've explained so far. But now the human process should begin, and it's not beginning. What is it? Having connected to Greenland, Donald J. Trump, if he is a proper human being, if he is properly developed in his humanity, he will or he should withdraw into himself and start this process of processing this whole idea of relating to Greenland, so as to decide on the best way to deal with this situation. And I'm not going to get into the nuts and bolts issues because that will take a lot of a lot of your time. I have plenty of time. You don't have time. So there, if Donald Trump is not defective in his personality, he should say, look, I am acting unilaterally. The people of Greenland, there are only 57,000 people living in that huge island. Greenland is the world's largest island, full of deposits, rare earth minerals, etc., apart from the geopolitical significance. Therefore, quite an attractive object, an object of desire. Now, can I, as a representative of America, the first citizen of America, violate international rules-based order, which America has been projecting itself as the number one protector for at least 8 years? Can I act unilaterally in complete violation of the fundamental principles of the international rules-based order? Can I behave like Putin? So that's one question. The second question to ask is, what will be the consequences of this if I go ahead and act unilaterally using violence? What disruptive consequences would eventuate from it? Donald Trump seems to be incapable of processing this. That's why I'm saying that he's completely self-willed in an infantile manner. Please note, please note, please note, he's a grown-up baby. At least he's behaving like one. He's acting in an aggressive, self-willed manner in an infantile way. For a child, if the child says, I want that toy, and if that toy is not given to the child, it will cry and cry, it'll throw a tantrum, it will bring the roof down. That's exactly what our friend Donald Trump is doing. It's so embarrassing. It's so embarrassing. And what he said yesterday, and that's the only reason why I'm doing this video, what he said yesterday to the Prime Minister of Norway is the limit. It's the absolute limit. He says, since the Nobel Peace Award giving committee is based in Norway, And that committee did not award the Peace Prize to me, which I have long coveted. I'm a big baby. This Peace Prize is my toy, my coveted toy. I've been coveting it for long, but in spite of the fact that I stopped 8 wars, I don't know what those wars are, 8.5, he says, you have not given the Peace Prize. Therefore, I don't care for peace. I haven't heard a worse joke than this in my lifetime. I'm a man of peace. I became the president of India, president of America, to make the world safe for peace. But if you don't give me the Nobel Prize for Peace, I will not care for peace. This is the infantile self-willedness in its most naked and aggressive form. It's very embarrassing. I love America. I care for Americans. I have many friends in America. I have wonderful experiences in that country, many, many occasions. I feel sad that America has come to this sorry pass. Look at the relationship between America and Europe. Europe, America's most faithful ally. Now, this is what happens when a grown-up baby occupies the world's most powerful office. There's one more aspect of this, which I shall quickly mention for want of time, and then I'll close. Trump makes it very obvious that he occupies the most powerful office in the world. Of that, there is no doubt. And ipso facto, he is the most powerful man in the world. So he is drunk on the wine of power. He is intoxicated with power. But there's a problem. The problem is power, to be real, has to be exercised. Power as only a potentiality, that is what is called implicit power as against explicit power. Please note the distinction. Implicit power. The President of America has unrivaled implicit power. But if it only remains implicit power, then it is as good as not having it. For example, you have a lot of implicit wealth in the form of your bank deposits. You may have 1,000 crores in your name in the bank. But if you don't use even a single dollar, then intrinsically you are a billionaire, but in reality you are a pauper. You're living like a pauper. In the same manner, when you occupy the office of the President of the United States of America, you have a lot of intrinsic power. But the question is how to actualize that power. There again, the pattern I introduced a short while ago applies. You can go about it in an infantile manner or in a mature manner. And the infantile way of going about in this particular instance is to act in a belligerent, insensitive, unilateral way, unmindful of the harm it's causing to one's friends as well as to the global order, which is a terrible thing to do given the even today intact global dominance of America. What America does, what happens to America happens to the rest of the world, whether you like it or not. And that's the reason why we in the rest of the world, the so-called third world, cannot remain indifferent to it. That's the reason why I have decided to pluck the courage to make these statements. I believe Donald Trump can do better, but someone needs to counsel him. But whether he is open to counseling or not, I don't know. But I have to say this with all the conviction I am capable of, that today President Donald J. Trump is conducting himself in an abominable manner. He is bringing ridicule upon himself. To think that you can actually borrow a Nobel Peace Prize from a woman and flaunt it as your own, you have to be not half mad, but raving mad. And even madness is not enough. You have to abandon the last vestige of self-respect. And that is further now vitiated by the statement to the Norwegian Prime Minister that if you don't give me the Nobel Prize, I will burn up my commitment to peace, and I'll do what I want. I don't think even a 2-year-old child would throw a tantrum like this. It's very sad. It's very sad. It's very sad. I wish I didn't have to refer to this. But since it's obviously going from bad to worse and it's affecting all of us, we have a right and I have a duty to speak the truth. In conclusion, let me quote a sentence that I'm very fond of. This is from Voltaire, who says, oh, no, let me not go to Voltaire. Let me stick to the Eastern wisdom. Let me use a Chinese philosopher, Confucius. Confucius. You need to cultivate a little Confucius if you want to avoid confusion. He's a thinker of such eminent common sense, such sanctified clarity. I'm very fond of his teachings, Confucius. He said that the first thing you have to do if you want to begin to help humanity is to call things by the right name. So Donald J. Trump may be the president of America, but if you call him by the right name, he is a self-willed infant who does not know how to realize the power of his office in a dignified, humane, and sensitive manner. Thank you. God bless America. Jai Hind.